Hey there, Miss Wyatt here, and today I'm kind of want to walk you through a process of mine for something I do. Um, so for the past few weeks, I've been thinking about why I work on so many projects at once, and why a lot of those projects are not even finished. And um, the easiest answer, I could say would be, I could easily just say ADHD and end it at that. But at the same time, not everyone with ADHD has this problem, and it's not necessarily just an ADHD issue. So the more I thought about it, I started asking myself, well, if it's not an ADHD question, then what is it? And to a certain extent, I can base it on ADHD because my mind needs to constantly be stimulated. I need to constantly have a new, something new and interesting that is occupying mind at any moment in time. That's why I work on so many songs. That's why I'm working on so many stories. That's why, you know, I'm constantly working on new video ideas and new series and all that. And even when it comes to the type of things I work on, like in my own time, and that's like my voice, um, voice acting, editing, writing, and all that stuff. It's that kind constant stimulation of having something new is why I like. That's why I work on multiple things, and then also I realize I have a huge need of getting validation and feedback, especially positive validation and positive feedback. And that's why I think a lot of like some of my stories, more so my stories and even my music to a lesser extent, is that's why I do so many of them at once, because I'm constantly looking for people to say, hey, that's really interesting, hey, that's really good, hey, being constantly like being told that what I'm doing is actually really good. I'm constantly looking for that, and if I'm only working on that, I feel like there's one less, that's only one chance of getting that validation. Whereas when I'm working on like 10, 5, 10 or more, I have that's just 5, 10 or more avenues for me to get that kind of feedback, and getting like people saying, oh wow, that's really good, not just on one thing but on multiple types of things. So that got me wondering. So that's I feel like that's also that. But then when I think even deeper into it, I've always wondered, well, why do I need that positive feedback? Um, on just You could say it's because I have very low self confidence in myself, and that's probably why I'm constantly looking for validation, not just um, in my work, but also in me as a person, from my friends, from my family, even from people I interact with online. I'm always looking for that validation. But when I start looking, but low confidence, where did it come from? Because you'd expect someone who is constantly touted as brilliant or talented, you'd expect them to have a higher self confidence than what I necessarily have. And to an extent, you would be right. You'd think that I should have higher self confidence. But when you look into it even further, when you go, when you look at how I've always performed in school, um, from the from actually from primary all the way to university, people have always had an issue with how I perform in school. Everyone kept telling me I'm not living up to my potential. Everyone kept telling me that I'm not trying hard enough. And a lot of that, yes, as much as a lot of that does go down to my ADHD and to a lesser extent my bipolar, that doesn't explain like why I am constantly like falling short of my expectations that are set for me. And I believe that's more so because a lot of these expectations that are set for me are not being tempered by what I can actively achieve in the time frame that has been given me to achieve them. And when I say that, I mean, if you expect me to finish an exam in an hour, yes, I probably will be able to do it with that hour, but at the same time, just believe there are going to be a lot of mistakes. And I think for me, that kind of trade-off between what I can do within the time and what is realistically going to be given in that kind of time frame is where I think a lot of my failures and shortcomings come from. And on top of that, you also have to look at it from, again, back to the whole point of I'm always looking for something, the kind of novelty idea. It is a huge reason why I think for me, I've always found better in subjects that I've always been interested in. Because it's easier for me to, my attention to be grabbed, especially when I'm off medication and I'm not constantly fidgeting. It's easier for me to focus on something that I'm interested in rather than something I'm not interested in. That's why I'll have an easy time in, say, music than I would in, say, geography. So when you put it all together, what does that get to? It gets to a point where you start wondering, okay, if all that lays true, then how come, as a university student, why didn't I just choose a subject that I was interested in? And what I'll say to that is sometimes when you're choosing your degree, not everything is within your control. There are multiple things that you have to factor in. Sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's the quality of the degree, sometimes it's even what you yourself want from that degree as well. And that's why I ended up doing a business degree at, for like a year before I switched to IT. Business I was not so much interested in. IT, I did have a bit of interest, but it was never something I ultimately saw myself doing for the rest of my life. It was kind of like the best of a bad situation. And I think a lot of neurodiverse people are forced into those type of scenarios where they're forced into the best of a bad situation. And that ultimately harms us because if one fail, a lot of the blame would be placed on us rather than trying to figure out, well, if that failed, why did that fail, and how can we make sure that we don't fail in the future. I think that's a huge thing that needs to be, we need to focus on. It's like trying to figure out how we can get, less failure. But anyway, so again, did IT for about 4 years, and then I eventually dropped out. Personally, I thought I dropped out because I thought I wasn't good at school. I mean, my grades might say otherwise. I mean, I was, for a year, ironically, I was doing well, but again, in that year, I was only doing general requirements, which means, I mean, if you're not passing general requirements, then there's definitely some much more stake than just not enjoying. But on top of that, my high school grades were some of the best, and my marks, of course, not the best, but when I had good grades, I had really good grades, but on the other side, if I had bad grades, I also had really, really bad grades. So it was kind of extremes with me. And I think because everyone kept expecting me to constantly get good grades, constantly get those A's, those B's, that failure made me feel like I was letting people down. And even in university, um, anytime I did something and I felt like I was letting, like, it just didn't go my way, or like I did badly, I always felt I was letting someone down, whether it be my family or even my friends, like to a certain extent. Like, I always felt like I was letting someone down, and it got to a point where I wasn't necessarily doing things, for myself, more so doing it for others. And when you're neurodiverse, the last thing you want to do is do something for others. You want to feel like you're doing it to benefit yourself. So all in all, I think it's like that whole, society making you feel like you have to do this for others. You have to do it for your family. You have to do it for, um, your parents. You have to do it for your siblings. I think that is such a bad way to look at stuff, and it's such a toxic mindset to brew in a child, let alone a neurodiverse child who already has a lot of pressure on them. But just a child, like, why would you put that amount of pressure? Like, make it feel like everything that they do has to be for someone else. Like, nothing they can do can't for them. Like, if you're doing something, you have to prove someone wrong. Um, if you're choosing a subject, you have to make money so you can support your family. Like, if you're doing, it's just there's always that other person. Like, it's never just me. Like, I can't do something for myself. Like, and I feel like that's kind of it's kind of bad. I mean, some people do benefit well from it, but a lot of us neurodiverse people don't benefit a lot from it, and especially when you were forced to go into subjects that don't work well, are not compatible with how we work and how we think, and then we go to schools that don't fully support us, and at the end of the day, you just we're just being set for failure. So, I think for me, when all is said and done, I think the reason I work on so many projects and stop so many midway is because when you look at everything that I've just said, it is more so a sense of failure. I fear failing, and as bad as that sounds, when as a neurodiverse person, when you're constantly told that you're not living up to your potential, and as a you're not, you have to prove other people wrong, when you have to do this for others, like, you have to, like, any sense of failing is kind of offsetting, and when you fail, it's always blown out of proportion. Like, people are so used to seeing their failures magnified, and then their successes are more or less minimized. Like, most people probably would ignore them, but they won't be as celebrated as your failures. And I think that's where the sense of failure and that low self-esteem and all this comes into it. So at the end of the day, I think going forward, we need to figure out how we can stop pressuring people to do things that wouldn't necessarily benefit them, as a neurodiverse society, for like neurodiverse people at least. We need to figure out how we can identify what they want, what they like, their talents, and how we can push that to a point where they themselves can benefit from it, not the people around them. And I think that is the biggest takeaway from, like, my personal thought process. So, hope you enjoyed what I've talked about today. As usual, there'll be links. If you want to support me, there'll be links in the description. Um, if you're a subscriber, always is a subscription always help. And if you feel like there's something I've probably forgotten, or you feel like you want to add, always feel free to leave a comment down below. Thanks again, and until next time.